the truth is these small towns in Iowa and around, they're dying. They're these beautiful little towns filled with wonderful people who have great hearts, and yet their kids grow up and they go to college and they move away, and there's not a whole lot left.
Welcome to Book Reporter Talks to. My guest today is Nicole Baart, and we're going to be discussing her latest novel, Everything We Didn't Say. Great title. We're going to talk about that later too, which this book is the most popular Book of the Month Club selection for October, and it's a Book Reporter Bets On selection. Wendy Walker had this to say about it: a riveting tale about love, loyalty, and secrets that will sink into your bones and leave you breathless. I completely agree. So as we ponder that line, welcome, Nicole.
Thank you so much for having me. It's so fun to be here.
So looking forward to this, because let's start by you telling us about Everything You Didn't Say.
Absolutely. So it's the story of Juniper Baker. She's a special archives librarian in Denver, Colorado, and she has returned to her small Iowa town ostensibly to help an old friend, but really she's there to solve a 15-year-old double homicide and try to win back the daughter she left behind. So yeah, it's secrets and family and small town and betrayals and lots of fun, I hope.
And she comes back and it's like you're coming back into town, and who are you? Like, who are you? Are you the person you were when you left? What is going on? Now, what was the inspiration for the plot? Like, where did this story come from?
Yeah, so years ago, this is something that mystery writers probably do. I don't think I'm the only one, but we love to look up cold cases. I love to listen to like cold case podcasts and crime podcasts. And it sounds a little morbid, and that's really not my intent. Like I desire to find closure to these stories. I think it's just, I can't imagine anything more heartbreaking than having a tragedy happen in my family and not be able to find resolution to that, like what happened. So yeah, I was looking up cold cases one day and I came across this case that just gripped me, and it kind of wouldn't leave me alone. And from there, the pieces just all started to kind of come together. I knew that I wanted to write about a small town. I often write about small towns, but this one I think is especially poignant, I guess. And I wanted to focus on that. So that was a major aspect of it, and drawing it all together.
So at the heart of the book is the mystery, and you always knew what was going to happen, or did that unfold as time went on? Like, did you always know how the story was going to end and what was going to happen, or were you playing with it as you went?
I was totally playing with it as I went. I had an idea. I had one ending completely in mind, and then I was probably 3/4 of the way through writing the first draft of it and went, oh my goodness, I'm wrong. I have it completely wrong, and had to change everything and go back and put those red herrings in there and that little bit of foreshadowing that, you don't want to get to the end and go, where did this come from? This makes no sense. There has to be that moment where it all clicks. And
a lot of the early reviews have been saying there are all these little fragments, and then it all comes together. I mean, it all comes together towards the end, but it's like, why is she doing this? Why is she doing that? But it's going to matter. Like, you just are like, I think I need to take note as I was reading the book. I think I better pay attention here, folks. I think I'm going to need this later.
Yeah, it's a really hard thing to do. I haven't always been writing mysteries. I started with contemporary fiction, and I love writing in any form. I even have ideas for fantasies and young adult novels and stuff, but there is something uniquely difficult about a mystery and putting it together in a good way. And I just didn't even know if it had worked until people started reading it. So good to know that.
And the ending surprised me more than once. There's more than one thing that happens towards the end. When you're writing it, did you know you nailed it when you finally had it down on the paper, or were you sitting there going, can I switch this, or I got it?
Okay, so I rewrote this book 3 times. It took me 3 years to write it, and we pulled it apart down to the studs and rebuilt multiple different times. So I have the most amazing agent, and she was so helpful and influential throughout this process, and also my editor. And yeah, it was a lot of hard work, but I'm really grateful that it ended very quickly.
And sometimes when that much rewriting happens, and I've said this so many times with books, it feels like it was rewritten. It feels like there's something like missing, and I don't get that. So it was really definitely care of the agent and the editor working with you, because it's in your head, but sometimes what's in an author's head doesn't make it onto the page. There's like something missing. And here I felt like it was really cohesive, the way it was all going to come together at the end. It was all going to pull together the right way. But I'm sure that along the way, it was like fits and starts of,
Yeah.
I'll do this, develop that character. Do I need a new character?
Yeah. You know, Danielle and Daniela, agent and editor, both just really got the vision for this book, and they were able to see things in it that I couldn't see, and able to just encourage me along the path as I was writing. It was really a special process.
So when they were looking for things, were they looking for character development, story development, a little bit of each, plot development? When you're getting like, kind of advice from an input, is it the story's done and they're enhancing it, or they're saying, push this, push that? I'm always curious.
Yeah, you know what? It was a little bit of all of the above. The very first draft that I wrote of this book did not work. And I wasn't in a great place personally, and then COVID hit, and there was just a lot of things going on. And I think I wrote it in a bit of a fog. And when I turned it in, pretty much immediately they came back with, I don't think we're where we need to be. And that's just a really hard thing to hear, because you put your heart and soul into this thing and you think you have it right. But then when I went back and read it again and looked at it through their eyes, I realized that we just had a really long ways to go. So that first really hard edit, I think, allowed us to start over, to take the pieces that worked and the characterizations that were making sense and make something out of it. And after that, it was just a lot of tweaking and trying to make it just right.
Mm-hmm. And you're sitting there going, would they really say this? Would they really do that? Would this really happen? Linwood Barclay, an author, gives me like my favorite line. He said, when you get the editor's notes back, it's like getting tests from the doctor. Am I going to live? Am I going to die? And it's like, is the book going to live, or is the book going to die? Like, we'd really like to get a feeling on this, folks. And sometimes the book needs to be on like life support. It needs a little bit more to get there. And it's really interesting, because sometimes people can make that life support work, and sometimes it's still going to, the paddles are not going to work. It's just not going to go there.
Oh yeah. I have books that I've abandoned. They're sitting on my computer and they'll probably never see the light of day. And that's okay too.
It's okay too, because as long as you work on the story. So, okay. Tell us about the town of Jericho, Iowa. I know you live in Iowa, small town. So tell us about Jericho and what this town is like, because it really infuses a lot of the story. I mean, as she's left and gone to Denver and she has to come home to Jericho, I mean, even the name of the town, take it away. Tell us about Jericho, Iowa.
So it's totally fictitious, but it's based on a lot of fact, a lot of reality. The small town that I live in is about 8,000, probably more like 9,000 people, which I know is so tiny to people who live in large cities, but that's not as small as they get. So Jericho is about 4,000 people, so half of where I live right now. And the truth is, these small towns in Iowa and around, I'm right at the corner of South Dakota and Minnesota, so I feel like I know kind of the whole Midwestern small town thing. They're dying. They're these beautiful little towns filled with wonderful people who have great hearts, and yet their kids grow up and they go to college and they move away, and there's not a whole lot left. So you'll drive down Main Street and there'll be, places that are boarded up, and there are people that you've seen walking those streets for the last 20, 30, 40 years who probably haven't even changed that much. But I just think that there's such a rich, unique environment, and filled with diversity, in spite of the fact that they seem very, monochromatic, I guess, on first glance. But I really wanted to take a look at the culture of a small town and the people in a small town and how they might be entrenched in their ideas and their values, and twist it a little bit. So, yeah.
And there's also always one family that has more money. There's always one family that has money, and with money comes power. Their home is bigger. Their family, when they walk down the street, they are the people that everybody looks at, the people that everyone want to be part of. And every town seems to have a family like this. So she is dating, when she was in high school, one of the guys from there, but like not telling anybody. It wasn't a really public relationship from what I'm reading in the pages. So what inspired that? It's like, yes, we do have that family, but her being a part of his family.
Yeah. Oh, that was just a fun one for me, because I did grow up in a small town and saw all of those dynamics between the different, echelons of people, I guess. And I wanted to play with that and show, I think one of the things that I try to do in my books is, I think sometimes we believe that the line between good and evil is drawn outside of the perimeter of our small town or our community or our friend group or whatever. And really, I believe that line is drawn right down the middle each and every person. So I think we have these ideas that this richer family, they have to be bad, they have to be, I don't know, exploitative or whatever. And I really wanted to play with that a little bit and look at Sullivan in particular, this love interest that she has, and show that he's this incredibly complicated person who has, a lot of depth to character. So I try to do that with each one of my characters. Like, there's good and bad in both of them.
Do you sketch characters out in advance? Like, do you actually draw the blonde hair, these characteristics, this, da, 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 or is it just coming together on the page? Is it something thought through in advance?
I think it through in advance. This is probably ridiculous, but sometimes I make Pinterest boards and just make them private. They're just for me, but it's a place where I can collect ideas of what they might look like, and just different things about their personality and what they like and what they're interested in. So I find that I have to know the person pretty intimately before I start writing them. Otherwise, I don't know what they're going to say in a conversation, and I don't know how they're going to act when something big happens. So.
Yeah. And it's still that glance across the room at him and the glance across the room at her friend, and all those kinds of things are going to become really important. So you need to know who the person is who's going to be giving that glance across the room and figure out what they're doing. Either that or the glance becomes something completely different.
Yeah. It all has a purpose.
All's got a purpose.
Yeah.
So Juniper gets wind when she's coming back that someone's working on a true crime podcast about the murders on this farm next to her where she grew up. Are you a true crime junkie? Because I know I am. I mean, you mentioned before you listen to, really, seriously.
Yes, 110%. I love it. I love podcasts, and I listen to them probably far more than I should, but it's just so interesting to me. I think we're having real moments where our entire country, if not world, is just really invested in these stories and longing for endings and resolution.
Well, even think about the Gabby Petito, Brian Laundrie case that happened. And the fact that Brian was found dead, but we don't know how he died. It's like we didn't get the right closure on the story. I feel like but what really happened and who knows what happens. And I mean, just off topic here, but I'm just sitting there going, okay, your girlfriend lived with you, you left together from New Jersey, and you come home without her. Like, don't your parents say, where'd she go?
Yeah.
If my son broke up with his girlfriend, I'd say, where'd she go?
Yeah,
I wouldn't sit there and say.
Yeah. I find it so interesting too that this has opened our eyes to cases all over the place. This is just the tip of the iceberg, and how interesting it is, like, which cases get the media attention and make people, sit up attention.
We have a woman in our town. I can't remember how many years she disappeared. She was like the school bus driver. People knew this woman, and she's gone. And we have no idea what happened. And every year on the anniversary, we bring this back up. But like, where did she go? And there was a man in the town next to us who was missing. And they actually found him in this river. They figure, like, this is what he was trying to do. And maybe he went into a coma, but he was missing. This is like, if you could go out and cover the area, this is not acres of nothingness. Like, where did these people go? So I'm talking about two people that in this immediate area, and I don't live in a very big town, to be sitting there and saying this is what happens. And then to hear about people on reservations, hear about people of color that have just gone someplace. And it's like, where did they leave and where did they end up? It's been I think it's brought so much to light about what's going on a very big level, because there's so many of these cases. We think this one is unique, but you also realize as true crime broadcasters, how much they were able to patch together. And that's what you're showing in your book as well, is where is all that evidence? And I'm not going to give away where she sees somebody trying to pick that evidence together, but that moment where she sees what's unfolding has to be terrifying, because you're realizing somebody is putting your whole story up on a storyboard. And is that really the right story?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that the truth is, there's his version, her version, and then somewhere in the middle is what actually happened. I think there's even more than that, because every encounter that we have, every experience that we have, we see through the lens of our own experience and ideas. And what is truth? Very existential question, but
it's really true. I mean, that point where you're looking in the room and you just see all the evidence, but is the evidence telling the story? And I think you do a really good job of saying is, even though all these facts are there, are they the story? And is that really what we want to be looking at about this person? The person is missing, the people who are gone. What is the story really?
Well, and the who and the what and the when and all the facts of it are interesting. But what I'm most drawn to is the why. Like, why did this happen? And transpired between them to bring us to this point where we're, investigating a murder. I always want to know the why.
Yeah, and there's this couple, and the couple, we'll get into them in a second, but they were really interesting couple as well. So why was it them? Why were somebody going after them? Well, let's go back for a second, because you captured Juniper and her friend Ashley both as teens and young women. Which was easier to write? Because I know you've got teens. Was it the teens or the young woman? Which was easier to do?
Oh, you know what? I absolutely love writing teenagers. Maybe I need to write young adults, but they're just fun. And yeah, I do have a house full of teens. I have 4 teenagers right now. So their lives and their dramas and everything that unfolds is just, right on the stage in front of me. But I really like writing young adult too. I remember those, they're, in their early 30s. So young children and stuff. And that doesn't feel very far away to me. And some of my favorite years, but also some of the most difficult years. So it's kind of fun to try to capture that.
The tension between them, what was going on. Was it always the plan to jump between the time period today and 14 years earlier? Because in the book, what it is winter, and then you go back 14 years. Was that always the plan?
Yeah, you know what? That was one of the biggest things I wanted to do with this book was, it's winter and summer. It's her youth and, optimism and excitement for the future versus jaded. I'm older, things didn't turn out the way that I wanted to. So I really wanted to play with those 2 things. And actually there's more than just 2, but opposites, I guess, and see what that felt like going back and forth. But try to find a way to make the story so coherent that as you're jumping back and forth, you're experiencing this, but it fits and it makes sense. So yeah.
And did you write all of one time period and then the other, or did you go back and forth?
I go chapter by chapter. Yeah. If you read closely, every chapter will tie into the one after it in one small way. Like there's a detail that ties from one to the other, whether it's a dog. There are dogs in the book. And yeah, maybe at the end of one chapter, I'm talking about a dog, and at the beginning of the next, the dog comes back again, or whatever it is. But for me, that was the thread that drew the whole story together and made it all make sense. But I don't know that anybody else would even notice that it's there.
I need to go do more close reading. I miss that. And I like catching these things. I totally miss that. This is great. I did notice that Juniper's voice in the past is told in first person. And then in the present, it's told in third person. What made you use that decision, and why?
We had a lot of discussions about that, agent editor and myself, and we talked a lot about making the whole thing third person or the whole thing first person. But to me, when she's 19 years old, that was when she felt most like herself and most like, the person that she was supposed to be. And after the murders and after she leaves and she leaves her daughter behind, that's not a secret. She doesn't feel like herself, and there's this distance in her own character. So it was a lot of fun to write those first person chapters as a teenager and on the cusp of absolutely everything, and then have a little bit more distance and
this distance, and pull it back and say what she was doing before, what did it influence? How do we go from there?
Yeah.
So you write really fraught relationships between mothers and daughters, between Juniper and her daughter, Willa, and Juniper and her mother, Reb. Was one easier to delve into than the other? Because those are really, they're mother-daughter relationships, no matter what, are fraught with whatever.
Yeah, they are. So I have a wonderful relationship with my own mom. So sometimes writing about difficult ones is harder for me because I can't pull from a storehouse of terrible memories and trauma and stuff. And I have a great relationship with my daughter too. And yet being a mom now of a 13-year-old or she's 14. Oh my goodness. She'd be horrified that I took a year off. When you get older, then you want that. But when you're young, you want to be old. It's so interesting to be in this position and to want so much for her. And there are times that the way that I parent has less to do. I don't even know how to describe it. I'm tripping all over my own words here talking about motherhood. Motherhood is a really difficult thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I just like to explore that and see the ways that mothers sacrifice of themselves and give themselves for their daughters, and the ways that we pull back and allow them to stand on their own. Like my husband accuses me, we have one girl, we have 4 boys and 1 girl. And my husband is always like, you're so hard on her. You're so hard on our daughter. And I'm like, but I have to be, because I know what she's going to face. And I know how people are going to look at her because she's a girl and what they're going to expect of her. So I got to make her tough to a certain extent, you know?
And
Yeah.
you sit there and go, well, wait a second, maybe you should be working on the boys. I mean, seriously, why don't you start working on the boys that way?
Yeah. Well, he's pretty hard on them too. So
Yes, it works. It works.
yeah.
So you, like Ash Davidson, who I interviewed a couple of months ago about Damnation Spring, explore what happens when the earth is poisoned by water treated with chemicals. And it features, it's definitely a plot line through your book of what is going on with this. What drew you to add this to the plot and to add this to the storyline?
Yeah. Okay. So we live in a rural community, lots of farming. I love it. And I grew up believing that like this is the fertile plain. This is the breadbasket of the United States and, you know, even of the world. We produce so many beautiful things, and we do. And yet, as I look around and see the way that our environment is changing and shifting, I'll just give you one example. We live really close to a pond. And when I was a kid, I used to go swimming there. And then when I was older, I was a lifeguard there. And there used to be a time that when we would stand on the high dive in this pond, you could see to the bottom, you know, 20, 25 feet down, completely clean and clear. Now you can hardly go in it. It is sludge. Like it's not safe. It smells when you get close, and it's runoff. It's runoff from the fields, and it's just not what it should be. And I see that happening all over, not just the Midwest, but the whole world. And I'm not a scientist. I can't write nonfiction about this. I want to be an advocate, and I want people to think about these things, but I hope that it's subtle enough and woven into the story enough that it's something that people wonder about, but that doesn't bash them over the head.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I was interviewing Ash, she said where she was growing up, it was the logging farmers and defoliating the woods. And as a result, that would get into the water supply. And she said to this day, nobody from her family drinks water from a tap. To this day, based on that, and they don't live in that area anymore, but they're just afraid of the water because they saw what water did to people. And it was, you know, stillbirths and things like that. So it definitely wrenches your attention because you think of just getting rid of the low lying so that you could get into the lumber. And here it's for farming. It's what can we do to make sure, you know, insects aren't eating things, or that, you know, crops are growing better, and all this kind of here we have the Japanese beetles that eat everything, and they eat everything for 2 months and then they go away. And it was really funny. This year I actually hid the dahlias from the Japanese beetles up on the deck. And it's really weird. They didn't come, like it literally, we're talking 10 feet or 15 feet of difference. They ate everything out here, but not there. And then people saying, you know, go put soap on. I mean, you have to like live outside doing all this kind of stuff. But it's like, how did that happen there, but not here? Like, how did you not come over? Now I realize I have to hide more next year. I have to take the cameras with me, you know? But there is that thing where it's like with farmers, because there's such a slow, short growing season, that it needs to be perfect. I mean, the corn can go bad in a day just because it's too hot or there's no water or whatever. And what do you need to do to preserve your crop is what's going on. And what is the effect on everything else for preserving crop and harvesting crop, you know?
Yeah, it's all interconnected, and it makes me sad to see how much the world has changed just in the years that I've been alive.
I mean, even just hearing about that pond and how much you used to lifeguard there, and people used to swim, and now it's uninhabitable for that. That's really, you mentioned there's 750 waterways that have been impaired around Iowa. Is that based on fact? Is that something that,
Yeah, granted, I did this research probably 3 years ago, so I'm not sure where it's at now. But yeah, there are impaired waterways everywhere. And then what are the fish that are coming in? The Asian carp. There's Asian carp in our rivers too, and they're throwing off the entire ecosystem. And yeah, I feel like we have a lot of work to do.
My husband is what he does is with his job is marine anti-fouling. And he spent a lot of time getting rid of zebra mussels up in the Great Lakes. I mean, he's perfected a system that actually will kill them in their embryonic stages, because if they get into a plant, they will shut the plant down. And there are all these kinds of life that we didn't have before. There are things that are like, lantern flies here and all this kind of stuff that's come from other parts of the world and are now having this huge impact on what's going on in the ecosystem here. How do you get rid of them safely? And when he's come up with something that was with copper, which is amazing because it's not chlorine, it's not something that's going to harm the environment, but you realize that that's not something that happens. People are looking for the quick fix. Like, what can I do quickly? And how can I spray? I mean, think about how many times people just go out and spray and then don't think it's going to be in the water later. It's going to be in the ground later, groundwater.
Yeah. What chemical can I put on it? And then how am I going to ingest that later? Yeah, you're exactly right.
And so where we've got, so why are we talking about this whole thing? Because we've got this family, the Murphys. The Murphys are the ones who were killed. And their natural farming is so idyllic. I mean, everything that they do and the way you describe everything that they've done, did a personal experience influence those characters? Because I feel like they're back to the earth, but by the same token, they're showing you the beauty in every single thing around them.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That's what I wanted to be. Like I was hoping someday that we would be able to live on an acreage and have a couple of cows. I love animals. I used to work on a dairy, have a couple goats, have some horses and stuff. And it's really difficult to do now where I'm at. In fact, they're not allowed to subsection farmland anymore. So what's left of acreages and farms is all that's left. And the family farm, like the small family farm in the acreage is dying because big corporations are coming in. They have a lot more money and they can, do, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of chickens on one farm and tens of thousands of cows on one farm instead of those smaller farms. So it is idyllic. It's something that I wish we had more of. I think that the family farm is something that could feed communities and change entire ecosystems in rural areas. But I don't know. I don't know if that's going to ever come back.
No, but it was so beautiful the way she described her making the soap, the different scents that she was trying to do, what she felt those scents would do. And I felt like Juniper was taking so much away from that. Like she was just taking so much away from that experience of somebody who was just defining beauty. It was like, this is really something beautiful in a place where you're not really thinking about that on the farm. You're thinking about the horse and the cow or whatever. But here it's like these fabulous pieces were being pulled together and she put them out at her farm stand and sell them. So when that's ravaged and when they're killed, it's sort of like the people that were different in the community were the ones that were taken away. And why were they taken away and what ends up happening? So
they didn't fit the mold. They didn't fit in with the small town. And oh yeah, that's hard. I think it's hard to be in a community and be different. And I think maybe those differences were celebrated more in the past and they're just not anymore. You have to
everything's supposed to be one way.
Yeah.
Well, and we'll get to the character of Willow, who's this young girl that Juniper had and then left her parents to raise, and she's gone on to Denver. She went on with her life. She went on to college. She went on with her life. And she's got this daughter that she has a very fraught relationship with. I mean, because she's really been raised by her parents and she's not really welcoming that she's come back. And she's also bearing a lot, including that her friends feel that her uncle is guilty of the murders of the Murphys. I mean, the true crime moment, all her friends really have put her uncle on trial themselves. And I feel you nailed the tough part about being from a small town where everybody's going to know what's going on with you. And they all know your history. So when they look at you, you're not you, you're your uncle did this and you're defined by that. And that's what they call her names based on. So was it just tough because she's in a small town, or is this like, what kids are going to go through?
Yeah. So I used to teach, my husband and I lived in Vancouver, British Columbia for several years. He's Canadian, and yeah, we lived there, and I taught in a high school, a really large high school. And I guess I believed for a really long time that small towns were this, unique microcosm and people were cruel and knew everything. But, the same thing existed there too. In high school. Yeah, I think the environment, I think the communities that arise up there, it's hard. It's hard to be a teenager.
Mm-hmm. Really, really rough. And it's especially when people know things and have defined you like that. And this girl is going through, her mom's absent. Everybody knows that who's her dad. It is not known. It is not spoken about who her father is at all. And as a result, like, who's her definition of the nuclear family? Who's her definition of what's going on? She's been relying on her grandparents, and now they're aging. And now her mother all of a sudden comes back. And I mean, there's a lot of slammed doors. There's a lot of, like, pushing and shoving,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of ignoring. And then all of a sudden it's like, well, how am I going to redefine my relationship with my mother? And what is going on with my uncle? What really happened there? So a lot of mystery there. The book has been described as a slow burn mystery. And do you agree about that? So many people are saying slow burn.
I love the term slow burn because I do think that that's true. To me, the characterization means a lot, and developing just a believable, hopefully in some ways likable, or at least understandable. I don't care if you don't like my characters, as long as you understand why they would do the things that they do. And if you don't, then I didn't do a very good job of building that character. So I do like the idea of a slow burn. I think it's important to set the stage before we jump right into the action.
Yeah, and there were a couple of different stages that we were looking at here. There was, and that's the whole thing, is like, we're looking at her with a relationship, her coming back to town, her trying to define who she is, her with her friend that she came back to help at the library, who's ill. Like, there are just many, many different layers. And I think she's coming home trying to figure out who she is. And then who's writing this true crime podcast? Is it this woman that she hears has this really popular blog? Like, where's the story coming from? And she sort of has to go back and confront all these people she was in high school with and say, is it you? Is it you? Is it you? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Who's that sharp? Who's that sharp? You're the co-founder of a nonprofit organization called One Body, One Hope that partners with a sisterhood of churches and orphanages in Monrovia, Liberia. And you're also an adoption advocate and the mother of 5 children from 4 different countries, which I just find is like amazing. So tell us a little bit, because I think you said 4 of them are teenagers. Tell us a little bit about what you do and them.
Absolutely. So our first son was born in Canada when we were living in Canada. So he's a Canadian citizen. And my husband is, of course, and I'm a dual citizen. And then we ended up moving back to the United States, which kind of took us by surprise. But yeah, here we are. Our second son was adopted from Ethiopia. And when we were in Ethiopia bringing him home, we stayed at a guest house for 3 weeks and became dear, dear friends with a gentleman who had the room next to us. Like, we did basically everything together for 3 weeks. And he happened to be from Liberia. So when we left on the same plane, actually, and flew to Sudan, landed in Khartoum, and he took off to Liberia, and we kept going to Europe. But we said, we want to stay in contact. Like, we had this fantastic relationship and we didn't want it to end. So we continued to call and email and talk to each other about once a week. And out of that, nonprofit began. Like, we call it the accidental ministry because we never intended for that to happen. But it was shortly after the Liberian Civil War. The second Liberian Civil War ended in 2005. And in 2007 is when we were in Ethiopia. And he had picked up 35 kids just off the streets of Monrovia after the Civil War and was providing for them. So it began there, just helping him take care of them. We started with a sponsorship program. And actually, I was just talking, my husband and I were talking about it yesterday, how far it's come in 15 years, because now we have 3 children's homes that serve over 150 kids. There's 6 schools, 27 churches. There's a commercial farm. We do lots of community redevelopment and a microfinance program. We have a 92% repayment rate in our microfinance program. It's really exciting. And honestly, we can't take any credit for it. It is 100% our friends in Liberia and their love for their country and their community. So they have an idea, and we just stoke the fire and give them what they need and set them up to run with it. So
are you actually raising money here, or is it ideas here? Is it a little bit of both?
It's a little bit of both. Yeah, we don't do like missions trips or anything like that. We do go to Liberia, but we go to help in any way that we can. Like, sometimes we'll bring, we've had an educational consultant from Nigeria who's been working with us for the past 3 years and doing these training seminars. So then we'll get teachers from around here and we'll all join in and do a teachers conference, or farmers from around here, because obviously we're a farming community. I live in this rural community. So we've had these incredible farmers go and help them figure out how to make a commercial farm run. And the truth of the matter is, we don't know a whole lot about plantain and cassava and cocoa. They do, but we can offer our advice and our input on how to make it profitable. And where to set your price points and how to get these products to market and that sort of thing. So it really is a collaboration.
Wow, so interesting. I know we had dinner a couple of years ago and you told me some, but the way it's grown since then is really, really exponential. And yeah, it is. It's like, okay, you've got this product. What can you do? Because moving product is sort of the same, like wherever you are, you just have to figure out how you're going to move it in that place, like, what you're going to do. But the fact that farmers can go there and bring that kind of knowledge, really, very, very interesting. And one of your children is from Liberia, one or two? One?
Two, actually. We have two from Liberia, one from Ethiopia, a Canadian and an American. So
yeah. And four of them are teenagers. Is the other one older or younger?
We have an 18-year-old Liberian. He was the last one to join our family. So he's only been home for 4 years. And then a 17, 15, 14, and 11.
Yeah. Lots of conversations in that house. I could just see. And are they all going to go to college? No, they're not all going the same day. They're not all going to college at the same time, at least. No two in the same year.
Yeah, but it goes quickly now because we have one already in college, actually, on the East Coast. Our second one will go to college next year, and then it's just boom, 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 and we'll be empty nesters in no time.
It'll definitely be, it'll definitely be it'd be definitely different by that point. It's like, wait, it's really quiet around here. This is your 10th book. Does the writing process get any easier? I mean, you said this one took 3 years, and granted, a mystery is more difficult, I would say, than writing, the typical fiction that you were writing when you first started out. But does it get any easier, or is it always, oh, here I go, I'm stuck?
That's a hard question. Honestly, my 10th book was my hardest book by a landslide. And I think it was because I got cocky. I kind of figured, oh, this is book number 10. I've got this all figured out. I know what I'm doing. And I left some basic rules that I had given myself years ago behind. So my biggest one is I have written every single one of my books longhand. I get a stack of legal pads, I get my favorite pens, and I start writing longhand. That doesn't necessarily mean every word is written longhand, but I begin every writing session old school and get rid of all screens. Well, with this book, with Everything We Didn't Say, I was like, oh, I'm past that. I don't need to do that anymore. I'm sure I can just sit at the computer and type this thing out. And I couldn't, it didn't work. So it really wasn't until I went back to my roots and got out those notebooks and pens and started writing it longhand that the story started to click again. So.
I know Kristen Hanna writes with these gel pens she's got the percent and the yellow legal pads. And I was joking when, Four Winds came out, I said, do I need to send you some legal pads and some gel pens so you can start the next one? But there are things that happen tactily, like when you're writing, as well as, the form of what's doing that really, really matters. And I laugh because my handwriting is so illegible. I mean, I type the notes that go in sympathy cards because no one would know what I'm saying. I mean, I'm just the worst handwriting. And there are times I'll write something down. I'm like, what did I say? So you must have beautiful handwriting to be able to go back and say, this is what I wrote.
No, I have this terrible, shorthand that nobody else could read but me. And sometimes I look back, I write it longhand, and then immediately when I'm done with the session, I put it into my computer, because if I left it for a day or two, I would never be able to know what I had written.
What those words were. This is like,
Yeah.
So who was your favorite character to write? I've got a guess, but let me see if I'm right.
Oh, yeah. That's a great question. Well, I loved writing Juniper because I felt like I got to know her really intimately, especially when she was 19. It was just fun. It was fun to remember that summer after high school and new love and all the excitement of what's to come. But I really had a lot of fun with India too. She's just a little cameo character, but she's fun. I want to be fun with her.
Yeah, India's really good. And who was the toughest? I'm going to guess. Oh, you go ahead. Because I guessed right on Juniper. So you tell me who was the toughest.
Oh, the toughest to write. I had a really hard time with Reb and Law, Juniper's parents. So I have wonderful parents. I had a bit of a hard time relating to them and getting inside of their heads and figuring out why they did the things that they did. Wasn't the easiest for me.
And it was also interesting because Juniper had left her child with them, and they were not the easiest characters in the world. And to have left her daughter with them, I had a lot of questions about that.
Yeah.
And I also thought that Willow would be a tough character to write because she's so between places. She's sort of abandoned in a lot of ways, loved, but abandoned, and definitely has those feelings of abandonment there. So was this always the title? Did we always say Everything We Didn't Say?
No, I think, you know what? I think the first title was The World Bittersweet,
Oh,
which
wow. Wow. I
yeah,
love this
probably.
because so many times it was never, this wasn't the title. This wasn't the working title, you know?
No, you know what? I'm terrible at titles. I have a really hard time with them. And I think I might try to make them too like ponderous and deep, or I don't know. But I usually have my agent and my editor usually come up with my titles because I'm
Titles.
really
And
bad
how
at
about the cover? Was this the first, or did you play with a lot of different things?
it. Yeah, the design team came up with this one pretty much right off the bat, but then they also had one that had like a girl kind of walking away. And then that just wasn't the right one. We just didn't
Yeah.
feel like that captured it quite right.
Yeah. This is like what's behind the window, like what really happened, what really happened in that house, what really happened, folks, you know? So let's also, Emily Tremaine narrates the audio. Did you have a hand in selecting her to do that?
I did. Yeah, that was a lot of fun. I get to see or hear, I guess, different snippets of people. So I think they sent me 5, and yeah, everybody has a really beautiful voice, but yet you have a way that you want it to sound. So yeah, I thought she was just perfect. So I can't wait to hear it. I haven't heard any of it yet, so I'm really looking forward to hearing how that turned out.
Do you usually listen to audiobooks? I know you said you listen to like podcasts. Do you listen to audiobooks as well?
You know what? I don't. I like to read. Well, not that listening isn't reading, but I like to hold the book in my hand. So
Right. It's interesting, when we used to commute into New York, I would listen to audiobooks a lot, and I don't do them as much here. In fact, I'm listening to this fabulous audiobook with Paul Simon and Malcolm Gladwell that's coming out in a couple of weeks, where Malcolm Gladwell is going to talk to Paul Simon about his writing career, and
I love Malcolm Gladwell.
it is amazing. I highly, highly recommend this. Highly recommend this. And he's talking about, like, the creation of Bridge Over Troubled Water. He's creating, this, and that is probably the thing I'm listening to the most right now. And I love Paul Simon, and I love, hearing Malcolm Gladwell interview him, because he's getting some things out that I, as a longtime fan, still haven't heard, but I still haven't had time to listen to the whole thing. And I'm like, really, it's like 45 minutes. How can you not do this? And I find that every time I sit down, I'm going back to the beginning,
Oh,
because I said, maybe you should just go to track 7 for a little while.
yeah.
But it's just harder because there's, so much going on. And as you're probably saying the same thing, last year I could picture you with like homeschooling, like every project had to happen in the house besides you're trying to write and edit a book.
It was completely insane. And my kids didn't do very well with homeschool. Like, I know there were some kids that probably really enjoyed it and liked being home with mom and decided they wanted to be there. Not my kids. They're super social. They wanted to be with their friends. It was a very dramatic season.
And it's really, really tough because now they're back into that routine. Like, we didn't go back till September this year. And we have friends whose kids went off to college and hadn't sat in a classroom in a year and a half. Like, they haven't had any of that, of what's going on, like that's sort of moving to the next level. And it's going to be very interesting to see, like, what happens from here. A lot of friends who had kids who have like ADHD or whatever, and they did great because they could be all over the place at home. They can lay on the bed. And I remember one friend saying, like, I haven't heard from the school at all this year. Usually I was on speed dial 1. So there are different ways that we've seen that people adapt. And it's like the other day we had a big, rainstorm here, and I was like, we could just work from home. Like, there's no, they can just go to school from home. I mean, there is no thing as snow day anymore. Just turn on your computer and do what you did last year. It's just very interesting to see how everything flipped like that. Yeah. And if I remember the day they said the kids aren't going to be at school, like, we're going to close the school for 2 weeks. And I was like, close the school for 2 weeks in March 2010? Like, what are you talking about? And we'll resume after the break. And I was like, why are we doing? And then to realize, you left that room and you didn't go back for a year and a half.
Yeah. My husband is the chief of staff at a university. And when they sent the kids home, I mean, they just left. They got in their cars and they drove away. They got on airplanes and they flew home and they left their rooms. And then the whole summer they had to hire an entire staff to come in and pack everything up and put it in boxes and send it to them. And crazy. It's just crazy.
And one of my friends said, like, the kid did the room because they moved in January. It was January student, and that's gone. Like, I have to go get all these things. I'm driving back to get everything and move it out. It's very, very crazy. So what's next for you? What are you working on now? Because life has got to be calmer. I mean, come on, we're at a different point in the pandemic. Crank that book out. You don't need 3 years, you need 3 months. Come on, let's go.
No, exactly. I'm excited. I actually just came back from a research trip in Duluth, Minnesota. So this one is going to take place on the North Shore of Minnesota in Lake Superior. And it's the story of an Instagrammer whose daughter goes missing. And Oh my goodness, I am just having so much fun. It's such a it's such a great book. Just because I'm having so much fun writing it, I hope that it really resonates with readers.
So it's like, okay, here's somebody who's a complete star, and where is your child, and where do you
Yeah.
go from there to find her?
Yeah, and what does that look like? Because yeah, I'm on Instagram. I have friends who are, Instagram famous or whatever. And what does it mean when you take pictures of your kids and put them online and they live there forever and they grow up, with the whole world being able to take a look at them? What does that do to them? And I don't know. I'm having a lot of fun.
It's
Playing
like
with
these people that are like TikTok and Instagram and whatever famous,
it. Yeah.
and you see their children, and you see, I always think this is just, every time I turn on TikTok, somehow I some that has this one father and son, and they're like, so like rawly funny with each other and stuff like that. And I'm like, how is this kid going to feel later? Like, what is going to happen later on as you go and see who the persona was that you were invented there?
Absolutely. Yep.
And you're just watching it, and you also realize though, okay, Instagram stardom is not sort of like Hollywood stardom. Like, these names in a very small sphere, because while Hollywood is here and big, Instagram, as big as you are, you're not that big, because you're known to, there are a lot of people that will never turn on Instagram, let alone find you. So the world there, I think, is so interesting, because you're big in a world that's where it's defined by what? It's defined by, like, what are the circumstances?
Yeah, that's exactly it. I'm having so much fun playing with that. And yeah, just imagining what it would be like to have something tragic happen in the somewhat public eye of.
Right. It's something. And how are you going to deal with it? How are you going to talk about it? And we have some people that I follow that I just laugh all day long, like laugh all day. Like, this is my life. And it's just like, I remember those days because my kids are older, but still, by the same token, they can be rawly funny about what's going on. When an author friend had, a little child was like riding her little bike like this home the other day. And she says, "We will be home in 97 hours." Because she had one of those ones where you just push your feet on the ground. And it's just those lines that are the lines that defined you with your children growing up. And you see people like living with their children now, and you're like, I remember that moment.
Oh, absolutely. And what's going on behind the camera? We only show one side of our lives, and how many takes did it take to get, to the right photo that you put up there? And it's very interesting to me.
I think it's very tough for kids growing up right now in these extremely manicured lives. And you're talking to somebody who worked at Condé Nast, where that was all the models' lives. And I saw all the airbrushing that was going on. I saw those girls get off the bus from Texas or whatever and come show up to try to get, just a feature in the book. And they'd be in Mademoiselle before they were in Vogue. And they'd be here, like it was a stepping stone of what was going on.
Yeah.
And to sit there and watch, like, what happened career-wise to them along the way, but also image-wise. Like, people used to come in and they'd say, "We're doing a bathing suit shoot." And they said, "Well, you better get her in and see if she's in her fat stage."
Oh.
And you would have this girl come in and you'd have these conversations. And it was really funny, because I used to say, "Well, why don't we just do some shoots on real people?" And somebody said, "Well, we don't really want to see real people. They want to see this fake kind of a thing." And when you think about that line now of the way everybody coutures themselves into whatever, or creates the personas they're going to be, it's that same thing I was saying before. It's like you just go make the persona.
Yeah. I'm so grateful that that's changing now, that real beauty is more accepted than it was when I was a teenager and a young adult. I hope it's
and being different is okay.
Right.
Everybody doesn't look the same. Remember, everybody had straight blonde hair. You had straight this, that, the other thing. If you weren't that, you weren't the idyllic. And it's much more, I don't know, more esoteric of what's going on right now. And even when you're talking about the small town you're writing about, people also had their own traits. They always had their own things of what they were going to do and who they were going to be. Even we didn't even talk about the friend Ashley, and the friend Ashley of like who Ashley was. She was going to stay there. She was not going anyplace. She was going to be the queen bee in that town. And that was her goal. That was her goal of what to do. So, well, as always, it's great to see you, Nicole. We need to do this more often.
Yeah. Well, this is so much fun. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us, really. And it was, the book is a slow burn, everybody. It really is. And that ending, I did not see coming. And if you do, you got to write me a note and tell me that you saw it, because I want to know how your little clairvoyant, tasks are going on. Because believe me, she invented one quick killer ending. So look forward to seeing you again soon. Thanks for joining us. And to our readers, look forward to seeing you next time on Book Reporter Talks To.